Okay, let's get started. So today is March 27th, 2021. My name is Jenna Masahara, and I'll be interviewing Alex Ryan for the Coquitlam Heritage Oral History Project. And this is just a reminder that the interview is being recorded and will be made available to the public. So, hello, Alex. Thank you for being here.
You're very welcome.
So I'm going to start out first, saying what year you were born and where, and what your childhood home was like.
Yes, I was born in 1937 in the island of St. Kitts in the Caribbean. I'm the fourth of six children in my family. And when I grew up, of course, I did not have a father present. So the family consisted of my mother and my siblings.
Did you get along with them, or was a lot of fighting? Or
The family dynamics. Okay, yeah. The family dynamics was really quite interesting. I used to think of myself as being somewhat in the middle of the constellation because there were three older siblings, and they tended to be, their own group. Not that they isolated me, because a lot of my early development, my older siblings, especially my sisters, were very instrumental in shaping and directing me. So, but anyway, the three seem to have been one group, sort of, and then the younger two formed their own dyad, and so I always saw myself as the guy in the middle, you know. But that notwithstanding, I think we had a really good family relationship overall.
what kind of games and stuff did you play growing up, or activities did you do?
Again, thinking of the 1940s, now moving over to the 40s now, 1940s in a third world country, I want a lot of organized games for children to play. We made our own games, in fact. When we look back on some of our childhood things, it's amazing how we entertained ourselves with a variety of things. What was common, though, in terms of adult organized sport was cricket and football, as it's known here, soccer. And so as children, we played the kind of pick up games of our own kind, not necessarily the formal cricket rules, but if you get a ball and you have a flat piece of board, well, we can play cricket and do it in our own way. So those were the kind of sports that were around. But more than those type of sports, we created things. I mean, I remember uh, spending hours after school, not in an organized activity, but playing marbles, to the point where my mother would be just furious that it took me so long to get home. But these on marble games and were really very much part of our existence. Or making tops. Tops was a big thing. Uh, we would design our own little tops and try to get them to spin. And one of the ways that kids played was to see if my top can be strong enough to break your top. So as I say, we designed our own games and had, I think, great fun growing up that way.
Nice. And so, when your mom was annoyed that you did that for so long, it was because you didn't have you had chores that you needed to do?
Oh yes, oh yes. We each had our various little things that we did at different stages of our life. At one particular point, well, for all my siblings, it seems that at a particular age, my mother wanted somebody to take care of a sheep. She always kept some sheep around. And in those days, living in what was called a city didn't really matter because you have goats right in your yard. But part of our chores, and I took over that role when I was approximately around 8 years old, 8 to 9. That it was my chore to take the sheep out in the morning before school to get them feeding in the wild, as it were, and get back home in time to get ready for school. I will do the same thing in the afternoon after school. We'll take them out. They'll graze and do whatever, and we'll get back before sunset, you know. So yeah, that was specifically my chore at that age. The others had theirs, and I think I kept that up until approximately age 10 or slightly after. And my younger brother now then took over. So yeah, had my chores all right.
And so what was school like for you? Um,
You have to imagine, you really have to picture a somewhat different system. We were a British colony. And so we were given free elementary education to approximately, I would say, what would be equivalent to grade 8 here. Uh, After that, your family either paid for high school for those who could get into high school, and not everybody could because high schools were limited, it was more elitist, or else one goes to work. So I went, of course, to the free elementary school. But I need to tell you something else about before the public school. We had a system in the island, more informal than anything else, where parents, of course, working parents would have to find some way of the children being cared for. And so there was this setup, they call it private school, really what is more like a glorified daycare, babysitting. But I must say that these teachers who run these private schools, of course, parents would pay whatever small amount, I presume, they actually did teach things. So I started school at age 4. Okay. So it really was this kind of a daycare come kindergarten come whatever uh, that we went to. But it played a significant role in my whole development, and learned, say, tables and memory work, because everything was done by rote. Uh, I learned quite a bit, really, so that by the time I was old enough at 6 or 7 to go to the public school, felt fairly comfortable in doing that. So yes, I went to public school, elementary public school, on and until about age 14. After that, well, any education I needed, I had to get that myself. The For the majority of our people, young people growing up in those days, if you had any real ambition for further education, there was an interesting path that some of us were able to follow. We took uh, correspondence courses, preparing us for what was called a General Certificate of Education. This was a British system where, uh, at 2 levels, the O level and the advanced level, one prepares for university. And so a number of our young men and women who had that kind of ambition and really quite the drive had to study particular subjects. And we get our material from Cambridge uh, University, they sent it down, and write our exam at a particular point, and get a results, and a lot of failures and a few passes and so forth. So that was a path I followed rather than a formal high school education.
and did this cost money? I'm assuming.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
oh yes. You had to pay for your own lessons and exam times and so forth. Yeah, it was quite a system. It still continues. In fact, I learned quite a bit later that even young people in England who are in the regular high school system, they still sit the GCE. This is part of their entrance to college and university. So the GCE is an important part of the British education system.
You said you had to do it yourself for your education. So how did you pay for?
Yes, of course. I mentioned that I left the free elementary school about age 14, 15, actually 15. I started working in a job. There was a gentleman I knew and worked for before. He was a baker initially. And in his early days of developing his business, he had me, my brother, and some other young people to be the people to deliver bread to his customers. So I knew him in that context, and he really liked me. And so when he moved to open up a sort of a corner store, um, not quite as big as 7-Eleven, but a significant one that supplied uh, a good part of the population, which is with basic foods. He asked me if I would run that store for him. So at age 15, yes, I started working and running that store, and did that for about 3 or 4 years. Um, and then later on, I, I changed that job and went to work in a part of the sugar industry. I was working in the accounting office of the sugar industry, which was the main and industry of the island, and worked there until I got myself ready to go off to university. Yeah. So yes, I was able to pay for some of these things.
Nice. And were you like living like in the city, like in what would be considered like a city at the time, or was it more
Yeah, the main town, and they refer to it as town more than a city, I suppose. It is the main town, the capital of the island. Yes, I lived in the town of Bastia, um, and yeah, that was the populous area.
what did your mom do for a living?
My mom um, did what I think the term for it is a hawker. She would buy stuff. Uh, she would. Let's back up. There was this industry, the sugar industry, where a goodly number of people were able to find regular work. Now, during the season when sugar was being made, and it was a relatively short season when you consider the entire year, sugarcane would be cut, they would be shipped, put on a kind of a train and sent to the factory. And this factory would be humming 24 hours, well, I think they shut down on Sundays, but that was a very busy time. So my mother would uh, buy things, fruits, foods, breads, fish, whatever, get them prepared as a prepared stuff, take them at the public dining area of the sugar factory and sell them to customers. Now there were other people doing similar things, and so they had their own set of customers, and my mother had her own. That would be repeated for lunchtime. Lunchtime, she would have a full hot meal prepared, taken to this place, and again sell. So this was her way of earning income. Most of my years that I remember, she may have done other things before I came along, but that was her way of supporting herself and her 6 children, which was quite remarkable. As she got older, of course, she needed help, especially in carrying the load of this thing. And I remember having to leave school at a certain point in the late morning to help her take this stuff up to the factory. And yeah, that was also part of my later chore, rather, after the sheep business. so so yes, I helped her out that way as others of my siblings did before me. Yeah.
And did your siblings also do kind of the same education as you did?
Yes, they would have had the same kind of background, the same kind of um, free elementary education. And from what I can gather, I was trying to ascertain if all of them went through the full system. Probably one or two of the older ones may not have made it all the way to the end, but I think all the rest of us did. Yeah, uh, went through that whole system. But of course, they went to work and they didn't pursue further education. My older brother, the late older brother, he and I are the only ones who pursued post-secondary type of education.
So like what sort of were like your family meals like growing up?
During those days,
Yeah.
well, again, in the context of a developing country, a small island, people yeah, had very basic kind of stuff. A family meal will consist of some kind of meat for protein, Um, I think our best bet most of the time was fish when it was available, because of course we're surrounded by the ocean. So let's take fish as a main protein. There would more often than not be some kind of a basic starch, usually rice. The people love rice. Um, Potatoes, but not the white potatoes as we know it, but a lot of sweet potatoes that are grown locally, carrots and so on. So vegetables that are locally grown would be part of that kind of a meal. And uh, individuals particularly look forward to making Sundays their special meal day. Usually, fresh meat would be available in the marketplace, and so quite often people would buy beef or pork or lamb, as the case might be, if they're available, because they weren't always available. And so plan for Sunday. Sunday was a good meal, and definitely um, made up of some kind of meat, and definitely rice and vegetables and so on. So uh, special occasions, you put on your best as well. So that was what meal was like.
What would be considered like throughout the year, like celebrations?
The normal festivals. I mean, let's back up. Um, we didn't do birthdays very often. People couldn't afford these sort of things. So birthday wasn't a big deal. I can't remember if I ever got a present for a birthday ever, but doesn't matter. Nobody else around me growing up did either. So, and that's the interesting thing. Even though we knew we were poor, it was relative to others around me.
Yeah.
So relative to the others, hey, we were getting along quite well, thank you. And nobody at least I don't remember feeling deprived or left out in any way. So yeah, even though it wasn't common to have birthday parties, um, as I said, I don't remember even having one. I do remember though that it was what it was just before I left for university. It was my 21st birthday. I did threw a party for my friends. So that was the first birthday party I remember. Next one, which was a really big one, was my 50th, right here in Coquitlam. Uh, Big time. Anyway, long and the short of it is, birthdays weren't a major celebration, but the major holidays like Easter and Christmas certainly were significant. And in my particular case, as people who belong to a local church, children and as children growing up, we look forward to these particular events because the churches always have, or my church anyway, had special children events. There is this, you call it a concert, you call it a program. There would be reciting of poems, there would be singing, there would be some sort of drama that you might be involved in. So those for me were great celebrations. Easter, Christmas, and I enjoyed those special times. At home, well, at home, then again, those two holidays also loomed large in terms of food and eating. People again put their best foot forward, so to speak, and the baking that will take place for, say, Easter. There will be a coconut pie. I was mentioning that to my daughter-in-law this morning. Uh, Coconut pie and other kind of sweets like that would be part of, say, Easter, and definitely Christmas, the black rum cake and so forth. Hey, that's how we remember it, and lots of other type of foods.
Can you make them nowadays or like in your include?
Well, I became interested in cooking when I was approximately age 13, and I remember, of course, trying to put certain things together, and my mother was quite helpful. The, the first thing I really learned to cook and specialized in for a couple of years was a special Caribbean stew that we like. We refer to the soup or stew. My mother taught me how to do this. So, more specifically, how to use the various vegetables that were available into the stew and how to prepare them and so on. So I became quite interested in that sort of thing. I don't think I did any other major cooking uh, during my middle teenage years. Um, but later on, when I went off to university and was living on my own, again, I became curious about foods, especially when I first worked off the campus. I worked in a restaurant, and of course, I was introduced to totally new foods in North America, and those that I liked or enjoyed. When I was living on my own, there was this desire to replicate them, to see if I can, uh, just present them or to build them from what I remember tasting either at a restaurant or someplace. So I became quite interested in cooking in those days, and carried that on in my family here after we established a family as well. So yeah, cooking has been part of my as I often said, my only really artistic expression.
What university did you go to?
Yes, for my undergraduate work, I went to Warner Pacific University in Portland, Oregon. This is a church college, church institution that I heard about, of course, when I was in the Caribbean, and it seemed like a huge distance away from a Caribbean island. But I was accepted, and I was able to enroll and get myself going. So yes, I did 2 degrees, uh, undergraduate degrees, a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and a Bachelor of Theology, Biblical Studies. So those are my first degrees. Yeah.
Going back a bit, did you know of any folk medicine when you were in St. Kitts?
Well, I suppose um, it's amazing to me as I grew up in later years and looking back on what life was like in those islands during those uh, early years. It's amazing how people develop means and ways of survival. Uh, and one of the things that was very common in the island where I grew up was the use of a variety of bush herbs and so on for tea. Everybody speak about bush tea, and it's a just amazing variety of stuff. And um, one still have sentimental feelings about certain of those. Take the example, lemongrass. Making a lemongrass tea was a very common thing my mother would do if we had a cold or cough or feeling any kind of a chill. A good hot lemongrass tea before bedtime, wrapping us up snugly, would certainly get rid of whatever bug was around. So that to me was amazing. There are other bushes that were used for other kind of things. One that that still is also quite mysterious is the use of a soursop bush. Soursop is a fruit, and somehow the people learned that the leaves made into a tea can be a tranquilizer, and it was commonly used for babies when they're fussing and can't get to sleep. The bush was boiled, and the children were given a drink of this thing, and they slept like a log. I I remember one time it was off on a special camp. We were in the island of Guam. We left here from Canada, a group of us from Canada, and some of the people in our group. Of course, it was the first time being in a tropical type of a country, and we were gone for almost 2 weeks. And in the second week, one man had said, "Man, I haven't been able to sleep a wink um, since he came to the island and was working." And we worked hard in the day because we were building something. And of course, he also was disturbed by the strange noises at night because the windows are opened and so on. So I said to him, man, I wish I knew that. I said, look, before you go from here tonight, this was a work site, to back to your billet, I'm going to get something for you. You see that tree there? And there was a soursop bush, a soursop tree in that area. I said, I am going to boil you a tea and give it to you. And so anyway, before he left that evening, I did. The following following day, he came back and said, "I don't know if it was a psychological suggestion or what, but I slept like a log last night." I said, "Yep, it's the South Bush. It does work. I know that for a fact."
But do you like nowadays like drink lemongrass tea?
Not as much. It is available. I can buy lemongrass from certain places. But again, when I speak of it in nostalgia, we like literally grew the thing. You see, so we were getting it fresh and just cut it off and boil it. Yes, I have used some that I bought from the store here, but probably my best remedy for any cold or flu is ginger tea, just good old ginger root. Uh, and have introduced it to my own family and others and said, look, if any bug comes around, uh, all you have to do is drink some ginger tea. No self-respecting bug is going to hang around after you have drunk it. It burns all the way down.
Nice. Like what was like the most difficult part about leaving your home to go to university?
You know, that wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. Um, of course, it's interesting. Some young men and women during those days look forward very much to some sort of change. I mean, the island could only support so many people. Opportunities, both educational and job and other advancements, were totally limited. Um, and so any prospect for a future or anybody with any ambition for a future prospect in their life would want to leave. So I was really looking forward, uh, first of all, to the opportunity to get to study in a formal way. And so when the time came, it was, let's get going here, you see. It's true. I remember the long trip because from the Caribbean up to New York and then all the way across to the West Coast. I remember as I was leaving New York, it hit me. Not New York, no. Before I even left, arrived in New York, I was flying over the island because I'd gone to Trinidad first and had to fly across the island on my way to New York. And all of a sudden, it hit me. Hey, I'm not going to see this place again for another at least 4 years. And there was a sort of a general homesickness that came on. And that was true when I arrived in Oregon. Um, it's so different. The climate was different. People were different. Uh, Foods were different. Uh, I guess my biggest nemesis in those early days was the darkness on the West Coast. We'll never forget one day in the winter, 4 o'clock, it was dark. And that just about did me in. I couldn't believe what I'd gotten myself into. But after that, one got accustomed to things, and life became wonderful.
Um, is this was it at in Portland, Oregon, that you became an ordained minister, or was this later
Oh
on?
no. My whole it's interesting. My whole education process was a fascinating one. I did not really want to be a minister in the church. Um, I saw myself in fairly early years of being a teacher. And when I was after it's about my fourth year, but first degree, I was being prepared, I think, to do some teaching in a small Bible school in the island of Trinidad. And I thought that I would be teaching there. In fact, the plans were being laid for me to go. And so when I graduated with my second degree, I was waiting for things to come together. And for some reason, and I still don't know the reason, it never did work out. So I was somewhat stranded because in the United States because I was on a student visa. So I began thinking in terms of, all right, okay, how can I stay here? What do I need to do? That was my initial interest, since I was not going to go back to a job that I thought I was going to have. But fairly early in my studies, no, I decided that I didn't want to be a minister necessarily, even though I did the basic preparations for it. The psychology won out in the sense that I became interested in pursuing something of that nature. What actually happened was once I was stranded, I call it stranded in the United States, I began looking at what else can I do? Uh, it's strange to me that I had never even thought about coming to Canada, which is just about 300 and something miles on up the road from Portland. Never occurred to me. I had fellow students who were from Canada, and friends, and an international organization I belonged to. Never occurred to me that I wanted to come to Canada at that point. One of my roommates was from Canada, from Winnipeg, but never crossed my mind. So what happened was that uh, three of my sisters at that point were living in England, and one of them said to me, "Hey, why don't you come on over and visit us, and I'll be here or something?" And so I thought, "Oh, okay." So I went over to England, not knowing why or what I was going to do. Of course, as a person with a background in a British colony, it was no problem getting in. Uh, and so I hung around in Manchester for for a few months, checking things out and getting used to the area. The truth is, I really didn't like England. I what I saw, I thought, no, I don't think I'll hang around here. But it was a few weeks uh, into my time there that I noticed an advertisement in the newspaper that the Canadian government had representatives in the area and were wanting to interview people uh, who might be interested in coming to Canada. So I thought, oh, okay, I'll go and see them, which I did, and they were quite keen. Uh, uh, Mind you, I hadn't worked in any professional position yet, but at least they were keen on my degrees, and thought that they could find me a position somewhere in Canada. What the guy who interviewed me didn't understand that a BA in psychology did not make me a psychologist. He thought he had a position as a psychologist somewhere in Eastern Canada. But anyway, uh, while he was processing all of this, I decided, you know what? Rather than waiting for him to find this position for me, why don't I explore on my own what might be possible? And so, somewhat out of the blue, I decided to write a letter to God knows whom. I think I addressed it to social service of some kind in Vancouver without a specific address. To my shock and surprise, I got a response from some people saying, uh, "We are looking for workers to come to work with us," um, and so were interested if I would file an application with them and do that. In the meantime, by the way, while I was in Manchester, I got a job in a mental health center. again, some friends put me onto this particular uh, mental health center. Several of them actually worked there, and they were looking for a psychiatric, somebody to work in the psychiatric social work field. Again, I had no experience, but I thought I would apply. And I got accepted and worked for a short time. And that's where my interest in psychiatric work began. So when I arrived in Canada, even though I worked for social service initially, my whole bent was on mental health. And I spent the next 34 years in that field here in British Columbia.
How long did you stay in England, though, in total?
Oh, 11 months.
Oh, just 11 months. Okay, so just short.
I was out of there.
Nice. When you first arrived in Canada, like, what was your first thing that you did?
Yes, the position that I applied for and got was to work with the British Columbia Department of, I think they used to call it, in social services. This was a sort of a general social service. You do people for social assistance, but also at that time, and I don't know if it still is true, the offices would also handle adoptions and so forth. I was sent to the northern little town of Prince Rupert when I first arrived. And so in that northern town, as in so many little towns in British Columbia, if you work in an office, you become senior in a hurry. There's such a turnover. So I particularly liked it when I was made, when my specialty was with adoptions and so on. So I enjoyed my time there. But then when my 2-year commitment was up, again, I just wanted to get back into mental health. So I came to the Lower Mainland, first applying for a position at Riverview Hospital, and worked there for a number of years as a psychiatric social worker. Went to UBC, did a master's program, and as I said, spent the next 30 some years in that whole field of mental health. I'll get back to your question about becoming an ordained minister.
I'll circle it.
How did all that happen? Well, as I said, my career took that path that I wanted to go in terms of mental health, and I must say I enjoyed my professional career in that area. I was coming up to approximately, I was just about age 60. I had a few more years I could have worked in my field, but I had worked long enough that I think I was eligible for my full retirement if I needed to. The local church I was attending was looking for an associate, a part-time person to work with the senior minister. And like so many people, I suppose, there comes a time in one's life you begin to ask yourself questions. Did I follow the right path? Did I fulfill my complete destiny? Mind you, all those years even though I was in one particular profession, I was very active in the church and helped in a variety of ways, not only locally, but nationally. And so I was involved. But then as this position came along, it became a bit of a question for me. You can do that, can't you? You have the background, you have the training. So as I calculated situation, I thought, you know what? I will take my retirement. Well, first of all, I had to apply for this position. I applied, and I guess people may have been surprised that I was interested in a part-time position. But I applied, and I got accepted, and thought, okay, I'll cash in my chips with the government and take early retirement, and so I did. So at age 60, I became an associate pastor, part-time, mind you, and as a result, of course, pursued ordination as well. Yeah. So that's how the long, circuitous route of life it took me around. Yeah.
What was the church called that you were part of?
Oh, I brought up in the Church of God, and yes, the college I went to was sponsored and supported by the Church of God. So yeah, I had a huge background in that area. And here in Lower Mainland, I went to the congregation of the Church of God. Yes.
How did you bring your family over to here?
Ah, I got married here. Um, I knew my wife as we were teenagers in the island, and we were part of the church as well. Of course, when I left, we weren't necessarily engaged. We were, considered ourselves friends, and I went off, as I say, to college, university to do my work without thinking about what kind of a romantic situation I'd be interested in. It was during my time there that in correspondence with her that and closer towards the end of my program that we became much more interested in each other and began literally a long distance relationship, very long distance, because she remained in St. Kitts for a period of time. Then she went off to Trinidad to study, and at one, I think it was the end of my fourth year of college, my mother died, and I went down, of course, and for the funeral, and stayed the summer. I decided to stay for the summer. I was going to set up and I was supposed to have a summer internship in Washington State here, but I decided to cancel it and got permission to do my internship while I was down there. So while I was there, then I, of course, went down to Trinidad to visit my then girlfriend, and our intense relationship grew from there. Of course, I went back to the United States, finished my second degree, and then took off for England. So poor lady had to wonder what in the world I'm going and what's happening. But we kept it in touch and kept at it. And so we announced a formal engagement of some kind from a distance. Talk about COVID distancing, that was bigger distance. So when I settled in Canada, when I arrived in BC and got established in Prince Rupert, I immediately started proceedings for her to come, for us to get married. And in those days, back in the mid 60s, life was much easier. She was here within a few months, and we got married right away, and yeah, started our family.
How did you keep in contact? Was it mostly like letters back and forth?
Yes, yes. Even telephone was not feasible for us. I mean, these days, of course, we have all the various ways of connecting, but this was mainly only letters. At one point, when I was still at the university, I would started making these little tapes, uh, recording messages, and then there was sort of a letter tape with tiny things, reel to reel. And so I decided to surprise her one time and shipped off one, and then so she liked it very much. So I did another. So, but of course she couldn't talk back right away to me, but it just listened to what I was saying. But yeah, most of all of our correspondence was by letters, and longing and waiting for one to arrive and all that sort of stuff.
Do you still have them? Like,
You know something? I on our 25th wedding anniversary, my older son was emceeing, and I was shocked and surprised that he produced letters I had written to her. My wife had saved them. so many of them. And hey, I don't understand. I guess women think differently than the men in those regards. She kept these letters. Uh, in fact, recently I was selling my home and going through and cleaning stuff out. I still found some of them. You know, you think, oh my goodness, how long could you hold on to these things? But so she had my letters. I didn't necessarily keep hers.
Okay. And what did she do for work?
Yes, when she arrived here in BC, first in Prince Rupert, she worked at City Hall in accounts receivable, I think, or accounts payable, and then pursued some night school in that area of accounting. Later on, when we moved back, when we moved down to the Lower Mainland, she continued with that at a local hospital. But later on, she got a job in the post office and spent 28 years working in the post office as a mail sorter. So yeah, we retired from that, and of course, yeah, got a pension there as well.
And how many children did you?
We have 3 children. We adopted our daughter as first. She was 12 when she came to us, and then we have two sons, natural sons. Yeah.
Oh.
Currently 4 grandchildren.
Where did you adopt your? Did your daughter from St. Kitts? Or?
Yes, from a relative. Yes, so sure, it was a relative that we decided to adopt a child from. Yes. Mm-hmm.
As a father, like how was your family dynamic?
Yeah. Well, looking back on a few of the things, I realized, man, starting out with a 12-year-old put me into a frame that I wasn't particularly ready for. How do I deal with a teenager, at that stage? So, of course, we made it in terms of helping her as much as we can. Everything was new. Of course, we had to become acquainted almost immediately with the school system, what is required, uh, how to navigate those sorts of things. I guess my wife did most of that. Um, and then, of course, later on, as the boys grew up, we got better acquainted with how to manage stuff like that. Yes, our whole family relationships, though, I think, in general, was quite pleasant, I would say. We did what we believed we wanted to inculcate in our children. Uh, the values that were important to us. Um, the two or three main values that I was particularly concerned about is that they develop good, well, learning skills. Education was important. Wanted them to pursue that as much as they possibly can. I wanted them to have a strong ethical and spiritual foundation, but also to learn good relationship dynamics, starting, of course, within the family. I should mention that after we settled, my wife and I settled here in BC, other family members started coming and wanted to be here. And so in a relatively short time, we had an expanding, extended family. And one of the real, for me anyway, one of the crucial things was for us to develop tight, close family relationships. See, many of us from our backgrounds came from homes that were not necessarily complete. As I mentioned, there was no father figure for me growing up. And yet, it's amazing. I didn't feel deprived necessarily. I think my mother and my older siblings certainly compensated a great deal for that. But I wanted my children and those extended family members who are now joining us here in North America to understand the importance of family and the solidity of family. And so we worked at it. It was an intentional, conscientious approach to develop a strong family roots. In, in fact, I remember my youngest son saying to me at one point, he said, "You know, I really thought our family was perfect. Everybody thought we were." Of course, this is when he discovered there were not all perfect people in the family. so, so, but at least what it said to me was that he had an impression that something good was taking place, only to realize that certain members of the family don't necessarily always want the same thing you want, but
Yeah.
at least he understood what a strong family relationship is like. So yeah, we worked at it. As I said, it was intentional, and I'm very pleased to say that not only my children have done very well. Um, Educationally. Uh, they've established themselves as solid citizens with strong character and strong ethical positions, and that makes me feel it was all worth it.
And with that, like strong family bonding, is a important part of it is like also telling your children and your grandchildren about your family history.
Yeah, as much as possible. Yeah, I I wrote something a few years ago which I called To My Grandchildren, and it was really for them. They were still very young, and my hope is that at some point they'll be able to read it and get some sense of where I came from and what life was like. I was reviewing it, I think it was yesterday, and I saw that in the prologue I mentioned to them, they were very young still when I wrote this, uh, that I that I'm living in their world in the 21st century. Uh, but I came from a world that would look so different than what they know. And I wanted them to get some sense of what that world was like. Hence the following stuff that I was about to write. In fact, I described that the difference between that world and this world as almost like being on a different planet. And I hope they will come to appreciate and understand something of that background. But yes, we have attempted, not in a very structured way, to communicate some of that type of history when the opportunities present themselves and to talk about certain things. But I felt pretty good in being able to at least write stuff that they may one of these days read. At least it's digitally preserved so that they can have it. Yeah.
Well, do you know, like for your own family history, like when your family like arrived to St. Kitts and that sort of thing?
No, no. You know, one of the really tragic things I would say in terms of uh, many people in the Caribbean is the the broken history that came as a result of slavery. Slavery really did a number on family structures. Um, and even after slavery was abolished, people were in a state of survival and lived in ways just to survive, so that looking back and learning something about what took place, I can see how and why family structures were decimated just by the sociology, the social structure of the time. And so, yes, we don't have a good, clear understanding of who was who. A couple of family members have attempted, as far as we were able, to do a bit of a family tree, and Now you can only get so far and then you get stuck because you don't know who's who after that. And many years ago, we had a family reunion and happened to have been in St. Kitts at that time. And I took some time off after the formal celebration and went to the island of Montserrat. Apparently, my father is from Montserrat, and I met some of his family then. A couple of his siblings were still alive at the time. And one of the things I discovered is that the name Ryan uh, came as a result of the plantation owners who were Irish, who settled in Montserrat. They didn't want to be in any of the other islands where the British were or the English were. And so Montserrat and the plantations there were settled by Irish. And of course, their names were given, Irish names were given to their people. I never saw so many Ryans as that time. And, there's a bit of a joke. One of my, he would have been one of my cousins. He married a young lady, but her maiden name was Ryan before he married her. So there were Ryans everywhere. But Montserrat became the sort of the place for these Irish names.
I'm assuming with that, like, there's probably not many like heirlooms or something that are passed down.
No, no. It's mostly, I look back with real empathy and understanding. I guess when one was growing up, you didn't think about these things. But I look back on how difficult life must have been, not just for my parents, but for her parents and so on, and how they survived. Uh, uh, Things like, yeah, heirlooms are not were not a big deal. Some people may have had those, but survival was the issue. You see, how do you survive and move on? And so, yeah, no, we unfortunately don't have things like that we could pass on.
Like, when did you move to Coquitlam?
Ah, glad we came to that because I want to talk about Coquitlam.
Okay.
I mentioned that when we came from Prince Rupert, I was going to be working at Riverview Hospital. And I remember looking for residents. Well, it's interesting. We didn't think we wanted to buy a house at that time. So we thought, we'll rent. And we ended up living in New Westminster, mainly because it gave access to transportation that the hospital provided for workers. And I thought, yeah, that would be good. We had we had looked at places here in Coquitlam. In fact, we ended up buying a house that was under construction at the time. We remember going by there. Eventually, anyway, we bought the house. So first, I lived in New Westminster and rented facilities. And then one day, a colleague of mine, a psychiatrist, approached me and said, "Hey, do you want to buy a house?" I said, "Oh, no, I don't have any money for a house right now." And I guess he was quite serious. What had happened was he was from overseas, and one of the restrictions that the whole medical services put on foreign doctors is that they had to go back and do their internship. It really made it very difficult. I think it was, in my opinion, grossly unfair how many of these doctors were treated. Anyway, long and short of it is, he needed to get a position for an internship, and the only place he could get it, he couldn't even get it in BC. You could get it in Alberta. He had just bought this particular house, and would have lost quite a bit. But so he thought if he could sign it over to me, we could work out something, and we did. And so I bought a house in Coquitlam, same one I think at that time you probably will be shocked. I think I paid 26,000 to him for it, but I discovered that had I bought it At the time that I was driving through here looking, I would have paid 16,000. So
Okay.
go figure. Anyway, that's how I happened to move to Coquitlam. We bought a house here, and and loved it. Really loved it. Of course, once we were living here, getting to having my own transportation, getting to work at the Riverview Hospital was a breeze. So no problem there. Yeah. Um, I need to tell you some of my activities in Coquitlam. I want to get this on the record,
Okay. Yes.
really. Um, I'm very pleased to be able to say that in the very early days of Share Society, uh, somebody who was working at the time, I think her name was Anne Grinnan, she approached me and two other mental health people, a fellow by the name of Farrell Hanna and another guy by the name of Ray Ball. We all lived in Coquitlam, and Share Society wanted to establish a crisis line for people calling in. And so she needed to train volunteers, and so she tapped on the shoulders of the three of us, and we did the initial training for all the Share Society crisis line people, and of course, coach them and monitor the whole thing and see that things were fairly established. So that was my first community involvement, and I'm very proud and pleased to talk about that time that we contributed. Later on, I became a member of the Share Society board for about a couple of years, and of course, I've always been very keen on what the work of Share Society here in Coquitlam. So yeah, I look back on that and think, yeah, that's a good start. And this was in the 70s, yeah, about the early to middle 70s that this took place. Later on, I also became involved with the City of Coquitlam volunteer committees. Coquitlam each year looks for volunteers to serve on a variety of committees that serve the cities. And I was able to serve on two committees over a period of time. One was the accessibility committee. These are about dealing with things within the city that make accessibility more available to people with needs. And so that was I did a short stint on that, maybe 1 year. And then the next couple of years, I worked on the Youth Justice Committee for the city of Coquitlam. Well, actually, it's Tri-City because I was one of the representatives from Coquitlam, but those committees are made up of people from Port Coquitlam and Port Moody and even Belcarra. So yes, this was another community expression. I also was a board member at one point for about 3 years, maybe four, of Pregnancy Concerns. This is a nonprofit pregnancy agency here in town. And yes, I served on their board. But one of my really great times was, yes, after I became an ordained minister, I was part of the Tri-City Ministerial Association. And I love the fact that that association uh, each year had an annual prayer breakfast for all the public servants, really, political people, the mayors, school board, uh, MLAs and MPs, fire chiefs, and so on. And usually it was in one of these elegant places, and the ministerial would not only pay for the breakfast for all these folks, but took the time to to really bless them. That was the intention. Want to say to them, "You're doing a good work. We're here to support you." And I must say, I missed the last few years after when my wife was quite sick. But I was very pleased to be part of the Tri-City Ministerial Association here in Coquitlam. So yeah, these are some of the things that I just wanted to put on the record of my involvement in the city.
Wow. That's a lot. Going back with like the Share Society, besides been like the help call line, was that the main part of it?
That was what my initial involvement. Of course, Share Society has a variety of programs from that time. In fact, I remember the recycling thing that they had right down here on Schoolhouse. An old building used to be there, and that's actually where we began. The three of us, the three fellas, in doing the training. But yeah, my involvement at that early time was just above the crisis line training volunteers.
Do you get your like children involved?
No, of course, they found their own path in due course, but no, I didn't necessarily get them involved in any of that those times. No, well, they came along later too. They were very, very young by that time. Yeah.
Right. Obviously, you've been involved a lot with Coquitlam activities. How about like nowadays out that you're like retired and stuff? Like, what sort of like how do you interact with Coquitlam? I guess.
Yeah. Um, different, a different phase of one's life. Things change and make adaptation. Yes, I remember, with some regret, really, when I started backing off from some of these positions. It was when my wife was diagnosed as having dementia, and I knew very well it was going to take its toll in some form or other. And yes, I was active and busy with a variety of things, but also it was clear in my mind that I had to begin to make changes. So I began dropping some of these activities. I loved being on the Coquitlam volunteer committees, and I loved being part of the ministerial. But yeah, I had to be realistic, and so as time went along, it became even more demanding that I'd be spending time with her and caring for her. So yeah, it made a huge change in my life as a result.
Sure. What did she pass away? If me ask.
Yeah, she died in November 2019. Yeah.
Sorry for your loss. Um, Going back, do you mind sharing some stories about your time working in Riverview? Like what sort of was like?
I guess we all wish we had the wisdom to make notes and write things about stuff that happened. Um, yes, I worked in the unit called East Lawn. This was a women's unit at the time um, when I first arrived there, which would have been what 19 what is it 1978 something like that. Yeah, 77, 78. No, 68. What am I talking about? 1968. um, at the time, that building had about 1,500 patients. Incredible. I mean, it's hard to imagine that is just one building, and then there were other buildings with their own numbers and so on. So that was really quite the thing. One of the things that I remember with satisfaction is that in uh, the middle, actually was the beginning of the 1970s, the government was very keen on uh, developing and paying for boarding homes for the patients. And part of the strategy was to, of course, get as many patients out into boarding homes as possible. Social workers at Riverview in all the buildings were charged or given the task of developing the whole program for getting patients prepared to go to the community. And I was very much involved in designing some of these programs. Uh, and so I had the satisfaction of seeing uh, the numbers reduced from 1,500 to approximately about 500 when I left in the 70s, and this was really, really quite the thing. We designed things to help these patients returned to society. Many of them had been there for 20, 30, 40 years and didn't even know how to deal with, say, the traffic lights and so on. I remember we used to do some community training. We'll take a few patients out to get them oriented to shopping malls and other kind of things like that. It seemed like child's play, but it was absolutely necessary. Imagine a patient who had been in a hospital for 30 years not knowing how to use an escalator. The escalators, the steps are moving, and it scared them to death. Now, I could sympathize with them. Why? Because when I arrived in Portland as a young man to go to school, I had never seen an escalator until I sat at the airport. I didn't know how to use it.
Yeah.
So at least my sympathy was with these patients in showing them uh, things like that they need to get used to. Um, but you know, I there was there are so many cases, but the one that really broke my heart was we were trying to get one lady prepared to go out. She had been there for, if I remember correctly, almost 30 years. And one of the things that we were doing was to try to keep in touch, get in touch with the family. We did a lot of detective work to find out who's who and where, because after so many years, families just lost track. I was able to track down her husband. This lady was admitted to the hospital after the birth of her first child with what we now know as postpartum depression. And she stayed there until the child was 40. Anyway, I did track the husband down to see what his circumstances were and what would happen. He had come and visited, according to the logbook, he had visited for years and years and years, got no encouragement as to whether things would change. When the Canadian laws on divorce came through, after that he could get a divorce, he divorced his wife, and by the time I was calling him to check on him and see what's happening, he had just remarried. I confess to you, I broke down in my office and cried for him and for this woman. We were able to get her out, but I just thought, oh my God, what a waste of years. I literally cried. It broke my heart. You know? So anyway,
Yeah.
so much for that story.
Well, what happened with the child?
Oh, the child grew up. The father took care of the child, and
Oh, okay.
yeah, by that time I think she was about 40 years old. Yeah, just an amazing thing. Anyway,
I guess, yeah, you've already sort of already um talked about it a bit, but like what was like sort of like the most rewarding part about that job? Um,
rear review in particular, or mental health and overall?
Mental health overall, let's say.
Yeah, yeah. The last 20 years of my professional life in mental health was spent with the forensic psychiatric services. I, um, uh, I became involved with some form of forensic work while I was at Riverview, and because some of the cases that I had on that in that unit were cases that came to the hospital from the courts. When the Forensic Psychiatric Commission was set up, one of the psychiatrists I'd worked with headed up this new commission. I had gone off after I left Riverview. I went to was seconded to a special program of the Berger Commission on Family and Children's Law, and I worked at an experimental court in Surrey called the Unified Family Court. I spent 3 years there. Uh, Very enjoyable, very enjoyable time. I won't go into detail with that one. But at the end of that time, I still technically, I still belong to the mental health department. And so I wanted to not to go back to Riverview, but to some other mental health facility. I had seen a position for a psychiatric social worker, and so I applied for it. And then the gentleman who was in charge of the commission, of course, he remembered me. He came to see me, literally came to see me and said, "Look, I have a job for you. Why don't you come and work for us at Forensic?" And so I did. I spent the next 20 years in the Forensic Psychiatric Service, uh, starting out initially with being a liaison officer with the court downtown, where I would be present in the remand court and work with Crown Counsel, try to do some triaging of people coming through in terms of their mental status and whether they should go to the forensic hospital uh, uh, out here at Riverview or go to a community center. Then later on, we developed a youth program within forensic, and with another, with a psychiatrist, we were appointed to set that program up. So the Forensic Psychiatric Youth Services is where I spent the last of my professional life in that field, where I became the manager of clinical services. And believe me, of all the things I've done, that was the most satisfying. We had a team of interdisciplinary group, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, nurses, uh, working together in a most profound way. And when I left, I mean, like so many things in government, things were always in flux. You know, there was somebody coming up with some new change. Broke my heart to leave at that time, but I felt confidence that these folks were so committed to this work that I knew that the service will continue. And yes, it was like abandoning them at the time when I should have been there to steer the ship some more. But yeah, for me, my most satisfying time in my field was in the forensic psychiatric services.
Um, and what was your like retirement? Did you have like a retirement party?
Yes, we had a retirement party. They had a retirement party for me. Uh, I remember my boss, who was the director. Um, I remember him saying at the party, "You know, this is wrong." He said, "I was supposed to retire before you, and you were supposed to take my place." Sorry, you didn't tell me. No, it was a good time. My children were there, at least those who were available. Not all of them were there, and yeah, it was good. It was a good retirement. I was amazed though, as recently as a couple of months ago, still have contact with some of the folks that I worked with. You know, um, coming up this week. A very good friend of mine. Her birthday's coming up. I definitely will be in touch with her. We had worked together for so long. So yeah, it was a rewarding time. Very, very. I look back on it with great satisfaction.
What do you do for like leisure? Um,
Yeah. Well, you know, within the last year or so, there has, but apart from COVID, has been a significant changes in my life. Um, and some of my great plans that I had, you know, have to be put aside for the time being. Quite apart from the fact that my wife died at the end of 2019. Then I had 20 in 2020, a couple of other things happened. A younger brother died. I was trying to steer him in the right direction with his health. That's one. Um, while I was trying to guide him, I ended up in hospital with a heart condition. That's really uh, sort of slowed me down quite a bit. I now have a pacemaker. Uh, well, my heart slowed down, and as a result, I had to slow down. um, but also the whole issue of, okay, so what are you going to do? My children who are here, well, all of them were saying, hey, are you going to stay in this big house? But no, we wasn't going to stay in this big house alone. So there was a change of getting rid of a home that we had built 25 years ago, and that sort of thing. So right now I'm living with one of my sons, enjoying that, and working things out that way. But yes, um, it changed a lot. What do I do for fun and recreation? Well, I try to keep exercising in some form. I have a mini gym downstairs, and so I take advantage of some of that just to keep the muscles limber so that they don't, my my joints don't rust and seize up. But I do a lot of reading. I've been doing a great deal of reading. I keep in touch, try to keep in touch with a number of people. And before all the restrictions connected with COVID, I certainly was developing a kind of a regular routine to meet with certain friends on a regular basis, and looking forward to when we can do that again. So yeah, I keep myself occupied. I do some writing sometimes, pull myself out of my laziness and start doing some little research for whatever project I want to write. So yeah, that keeps me going, and I enjoy my life. And even though I'm not as active as I once was, or involved in committees and boards as I once was, I can take the slow pace now.
Keeping in touch. Like, I mean, you said your brother died, but did your other siblings, are they still alive?
Uh, it's so funny that you should ask. One sibling remains. My oldest sister, she's 92, going on 93. And she lives right here in the Lower Mainland. So in fact, I'll be seeing her in a week or so. Um, yeah, they all decided in one consent to die off. What's the matter with them anyway?
I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Was that one of their siblings that used to live in England?
Yes, as a matter of fact, she's the one she's the one I lived with when I was in England. Yes, she eventually, of course, came over here. Um, Two other sisters stayed in England. Well, one stayed and then went back to St. Kitts to live, and then eventually went back to England. But she died a few years back as well. Uh, yeah, so the, the families left in England now are the nieces and nephews. Uh, yeah, some of whom were born there.
Before COVID restrictions, did you ever go traveling to visit them?
Oh yeah, mind you, it hadn't been recent. My last travel to England was 2012. Of course, I intended to go. My son and I were planning on going last year when the whole world shut down. I'm so glad I hadn't paid my money yet. But yes, we were planning on visiting with some of the family over there at that point, and then doing some other things. Um, yeah, even after this thing is all over, one has to wonder how much traveling I'll be able to do,
Right.
because my mobility is not at its best, but that's okay. I walk with a cane at times, more because of my knees than anything else. I still do my little walks around here. I go for my walk for half an hour or whatever, slow pace, but hey, get out there in the fresh air.
Yes. Right. Besides from like the obvious um technological stuff, like how would you say the world is different today than it was when you were a child?
When I was growing up, oh my goodness, yes. I part of that thing I told you I was writing, I mentioned to my kids in this, I hope it was a humorous way, that uh, they, having been born in this era, this timeline, this time, embrace technology straight from their womb. straight from the womb. But I, at that time when I was writing it, had a phone, a cell phone, and it is for phone, not for multiple devices and so on. I've since learned to text and all that kind of stuff, um, but yeah, I mean, let me give you an example of how different thing was. We did not have electricity in our house until I was about 17 or 18, somewhere there. I think it was probably about 17. And it was when I was working, I decided that we needed to get electricity. And so I paid for it. Tiny house, but at least we got electricity. Nothing fancy about the fixtures or anything, open light bulbs. But the more important thing was we got a radio. See, you could only have a radio. This is before transistor times, you know. You get a radio if you have power, you know. And so, and those radios were the big things that had shortwave and so on. Well, that was a great breakthrough for me. I loved it. I was able to listen to shortwave and overseas BBC and Voice of America and other kind of places. That's how different it was compared to, I mean, who worries about radio unless it's in your car, you know, anymore? Our kids, my grandkids in particular, well, they're whizzes on this, they're on this cell phone all day. If I had a little problem here with my computer one time, just call my grandson up. He came and, oh, okay, yeah, done. That's a difference.
How was access to music then growing up?
Again, radio was mainly the main source. You see, it sounds curious, but I remember there's a certain people who had uh, radios uh, and were able to turn up the volume or extend the volume outside. People would gather around. There was one particular program they used to call it used to be called Caribbean Matinee. It came out of Puerto Rico, and to play all the songs out of Hollywood and so forth. And people would literally gather to listen to this. You know, you think, oh my goodness, because they didn't have their own. Uh, and when I was growing up again, electricity was not available to everybody, even if everybody wanted to. Uh, Telephones were a specialty. Only a few places would have a telephone. In fact, if you needed to phone somebody, they probably wouldn't have a telephone either. So, hey, you live with it. I knew a couple of places where telephones were available, but who was I going to be phoning? They don't have a phone.
Yeah. Did you have a party line for telephone?
When we were in Prince Rupert, yet not in St. Kitts,
Yeah. Okay.
when we were in Prince Rupert, party lines still existed in some parts of British Columbia. And I remember, yes, having a phone with somebody who was on a party line. And of course, there have been jokes about that where people in small communities would say, all right, I know you're on the line. Would you get off, please? I didn't have that trouble, but I did know of having a party on one of my lines when I was in Prince Rupert.
um, is is there anything you want to say about like how since living in Coquitlam, how it's grown or changed?
Oh yeah, oh my goodness, yes, the city has significantly changed. I moved here in 1971. That's when we bought that house. Um, you were still allowed to have chickens. I remember one neighbor up here in Schoolhouse who had chickens. You know, I remember there was a farm up on Coma Lake Road, uh, and one of the concerns was that they had all kind of animals there, and sometimes the whole mosquito thing was very common in those days. Uh, Austin Avenue did not go all the way through to what is now Marina. It was ended at a certain point. and yes, it still had a certain rural uh, quality to it, uh, and summertime, spring and summertime, because of the prevalence of mosquitoes that were coming over, spraying the place, and so on. Has Coquitlam changed? Oh, yes, it has. Um, from I remember a number of about 40,000 to 60,000. Well, it's way, way beyond that as we started going up the mountains and developing other places. But yeah, I enjoy living in Coquitlam. We've been here now for yeah, 51 years right here.
As if you're comfortable with it, did you ever like experience either um like in Coquitlam or in Canada, um like experiences of racism or othering?
No, not really. I remember talking to Dennis about this at one point. No, I myself haven't here in Coquitlam. I have not experienced that at all. Of course, when I was a student in the United States, it was quite obvious in many places, and we encountered that. Um, one of the things I think happened here in British Columbia is that in the early years, and I'm thinking back now in the 60s when we first came here, mid 60s, there were so few Black people that it wasn't even, it didn't even register, it seems, on the general population. And the few that were around were mainly professional people. Uh, a lot of people had come to UBC, for example, and there were lawyers or doctors or social workers in my case, and other kind of professions. And so within the professions, somehow they were accepted. I didn't, at least for me, I didn't experience any kind of a negative pushback because of my color. Uh, if anything, and if you refer back to my position in forensic, highly respected by all colleagues and others, and even clients coming through and so forth. So no, I haven't experienced any direct kind of thing like that. Um, my kids would have bumped into things, in the schoolyard and so forth.
But you like experience that in like the States. What about England?
Uh, yeah, I guess I wasn't there long enough to experience a lot of things. England was tolerant of the Caribbean people because there are lots of them that were up there. People started going to England from the Caribbean in the 50s. It was a big thing. Uh, and literally hundreds from the islands, various islands, went up. Britain was looking for laborers in various sectors. And these colonial peoples filled a need. Um, Many were not highly educated, and so they took whatever kind of jobs they had. But later on, as we discovered, whenever a group of people begin to um, uh, be noticeable and make impact in a society, then the wider society begin to have their feelings and suspicions about them. And the things that we've heard about the overt um, expression of racism in England. It's really quite astounding. But what is so fascinating about that whole picture of racism is that it happens right across the spectrum of humanity. It doesn't really matter where you are. And if it wasn't a matter of color, it would be a matter of class. It would be a matter of other kind of status that some body would not like a particular uh, dress up, grooming style. It's weird. It seemed to be one of those ailments in the human nature that just infect us all in one form or another. So yeah, one learns to understand it and move around it. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Um, as do you have anything anything else that you want to share or talk about that you missed?
I saw one question here, which is kind of interesting. What world events had the most impact on you while you were growing up? Did any of them personally affect your family? Um, no personal effects of a world event, but I do remember two incidents which pertain to the World War II. While I was a child, which is most interesting. Um, Not that I knew what was going on at the time, but I later was able to put pieces together and realize, oh, that's what that was about. One was about a somewhat humorous incident where apparently the powers that be, the government was concerned that there were German ships in the Caribbean waters. And some nights they wanted all the lights turned off, whatever lights. We had so few street lights anyway, but they would turn off the street lights, from the light poles. But they went, they went from house to house asking people to turn off their lights. You need to bear in mind that we're not talking electricity here. We're talking oil lamps. Okay, so one particular night, this police came by our house and was demanding that we turn off the light. And my older sister, scared like anything else, she blew the light out. My mother, who is quite a strong-willed person, said, "I beg you, put my light back on." I don't know what my light have to do with it. Well, in fact, in reflection, I have to ask, really, what does an oil lamp do to attract anybody who's in the ocean? So that was one incident that I remember, and then I really was able to connect it later on with the war.
Right.
The second thing that I remember was the shortage of food. Lots of our imports came from Canada and England, and obviously during the war things were not in good shape, and so people improvised quite a bit. I found out later that there's one particular year where things were so bad that is that the normal type of imports and foods were not getting through, and people had to improvise with what they had. There's a particular fruit called breadfruit. Uh, Many people sort of despise it in some ways, but that particular year, the breadfruit trees across the island just bore like nobody's business. People began to realize that they had options, taking this fruit and turning it into some wonderful things that they had not thought about. I wish I knew what it was, but my mother, I remember drying some of the breadfruit, beating it into grinding it into kind of a flour, and made this my mind still tells me is the most tasty pancakes or fritters ever. I wish I knew how she made it. But those two little bits and pieces of memory began to make sense as I got older and realized something about the war. I thought, isn't that interesting? Yeah, the war did affect us, but not quite negatively as we thought it might have.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's really, wow.
Yeah. So that's it, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's all the questions I have. I don't know if Tanis has anything
Hi.
else.
Hey, Tanis, how
Hi,
you
I've been
doing?
listening. I've been enjoying all the information.
Too
It's
much information at a time. Too much.
no, it's not. In fact, I just thought the only other thing that I thought that would be useful for posterity is you mentioned earlier when Jenna asked you about your grandparents or ancestors, where they came from. And I thought it might be interesting down the road if your ancestors were looking for the same kind of information, just to have some surnames to follow up on. Do you know what was your mother's surname?
My mother's surname was Thomas.
Thomas?
Yeah, yes. And she was born in the island of St. Kitts,
Mm-hmm.
um, in a little area. Well, it's hard to know where it would have been registered, but in the little village of Black Rock.
Huh.
Um, I remember the last time we were in St. Kitts as a family. Um, well, actually, we had a cruise, a family reunion cruise, and we stopped, of course, in St. Kitts, and we went through the island, and it was particularly useful for us to stop at Black Rock to remember where my mother came from.
I don't know. Did you say the name of the town you grew up in?
Basseterre, Bassetere, part of the French, the time where the island was at one point divided between French and English.
Mhm.
So Basseterre is the lowland, and Capesterre, around the area where my mother came from, was the highlands.
Do you know any of your grandparents' surnames?
No. See, that's one of the problems. Again, things weren't passed on or mentioned. But my older sister vaguely remember my mother going to see her father. But again, we don't know his name.
And what about your siblings' surnames? Your sisters?
In terms of their married name?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. My older sister, of course, her married name is Pole, Pole. Um, the second sister, who died, of course, her married name was Herbert. Um, Her husband came from Nevis, the adjoining island. Yeah, I think
What
he's.
were their first names?
Oh, sorry, my sister, the older sister is Rita or Letitia Pole. My second sister is Viola Herbert. Um, the third sister, she got married quite late. Um, and to be honest, I don't know what it is. She died shortly after that.
Yeah.
It's a
Well,
terrible.
you never know when this kind of little tidbit will be really useful to someone.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time out to do this. This is going to be some interesting information down the road for a lot of people.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And I will certainly be in touch again, probably before the end of the summer, about the exhibit that we're putting up. So stay tuned for more.
Okay. All right.
And
Thanks again. Thanks, Jenna.
Yes, thank you for doing this. Oh yeah, that was really interesting listening.
Okay, thank you.
have a good rest of your weekend and a good Easter next weekend.
Thank you very much. Yes.
All right, we'll sign off
Bye-bye.
now. Bye.
Bye.